Imagine a time in Earth's history when land was far more dangerous than the ocean. A time when stepping onto solid ground meant encountering nightmarish predators while the sea offered relative safety. This concept flips the usual narrative on its head, as we tend to associate the ocean with fear, danger, and the unknown. For as long as humans have sailed across its vast expanse, the deep sea has been a source of mystery and terror. From sharks to giant squids, the ocean is often seen as a place where the rules of survival are harsher and more extreme than on land. Our fear of the ocean is deeply rooted in both nature and history. The creatures that lurk in its depths are often more formidable, larger, and more unpredictable than those we find on land. Even in prehistoric times, aquatic life seemed more terrifying. Consider the great predators of the seas, from ancient sharks like Megalodon to the colossal Mosasaurus of the late Cretaceous. These massive sea creatures, armed with rows of sharp teeth and built for speed, were often far scarier than their terrestrial counterparts. On land, even the most fearsome predators, like Tyrannosaurus rex, seemed to pale in comparison to the terror of the ocean's might. But it wasn't always this way. For a brief moment in Earth's history, this natural order was reversed. The land became the most dangerous place to be, while the ocean, typically a domain of lurking horror, became relatively tame. This anomaly occurred during the Lopingian epoch of the Permian period, around 259 million years ago, a time that would come to be known for its extremes, both in terms of the life it produced and the conditions under which that life had to survive. To understand why the ocean became safer than the land, we need to first set the stage by looking at the world as it existed during the Permian period. Life was dramatically different than it is today. The Earth's continents were fused together into a single supercontinent known as Pangaea. This vast landmass stretched across the globe, connecting modern-day regions like North America, Europe, Asia, and Africa in a way that seems unimaginable today. Surrounding this immense continent was an equally vast ocean called Panthalassa, which covered nearly the entire planet. This ocean, roughly twice the size of today's Pacific, was an expansive, featureless expanse of water. While the scale of Panthalassa might evoke a sense of dread, surprisingly, it was not a place filled with gigantic sea monsters during this period. Earth's oceans had already been through a turbulent time, and the marine life that once dominated the waters had been devastated by the Capetanian mass extinction, which had wiped out many oceanic species. The result was an ocean that, while still filled with life, lacked the towering predators that had previously ruled the seas. Meanwhile, on land, life was undergoing a major transformation. The extinction events that affected marine life had also taken a toll on land-dwelling creatures, but instead of calming down, terrestrial ecosystems were becoming more violent and chaotic. New species were emerging, species that were faster, stronger, and deadlier than what had come before. Among these were the Gorgonopsids, a group of predators that would come to dominate the land with their terrifying saber-tooth-like canines and predatory prowess. These creatures evolved quickly to fill the gaps left behind by older species that had been wiped out, and they became the most fearsome land predators of their time. But before diving deeper into these lethal land predators, it's essential to visualize the landscape of the late Permian period. Earth was far from the lush tropical world we often imagine when thinking of prehistory. Pangaea's climate was harsh and unforgiving, with large desert regions dominating much of the landmass. The supercontinent's interior was far from any oceanic moisture, creating vast arid areas where life struggled to survive. The temperatures in some parts of Pangaea could soar to levels that would make human survival today almost impossible. These extreme environments, with their scorching heat and dry conditions, were an additional challenge for the creatures trying to thrive on land. The other defining feature of this era was the Moon, which at that time was closer to Earth than it is today. This made days shorter, with the planet completing its rotation in about 22 hours rather than the 24-hour cycle we are used to. The proximity of the Moon also influenced Earth's tides, creating stronger and more dramatic tidal shifts in the oceans. While these tidal changes could be dangerous, they also contributed to the relatively calm nature of marine life during this time. The ocean wasn't without predators, but the massive sea monsters that had once ruled the waves were gone, and smaller, less dangerous creatures had taken their place. In this strange ancient world, the land had become a death trap, filled with enormous, fast-moving predators that could take down prey in a single strike. The Gorgonopsids, which will be discussed in greater detail later, were at the top of the food chain, making land a place of constant peril. By contrast, the ocean, typically a domain of fear, had become a refuge of sorts. The once dominant marine predators had been greatly diminished, leaving behind a calmer and less dangerous environment. The vastness of Panthalassa, while intimidating in its size, was not home to the kind of lethal creatures we might expect. This period of relative peace in the oceans wouldn't last, of course. The Great Dying, Earth's most catastrophic extinction event, was just a few million years away, and it would devastate marine and terrestrial life alike. But for this brief moment in Earth's history, if you were a creature living during the late Permian, the water was the safest place to be. The seas offered a level of security and calm that was absent on land, where danger lurked around every corner. This rare reversal of nature's usual order is a testament to the ever-changing dynamics of life on Earth. During the Lopingian epoch, Earth's oceans, despite their vastness and isolation, were surprisingly tranquil. Panthalassa, the massive superocean that encircled Pangaea, stretched endlessly across the planet. Its size was beyond comprehension, covering almost twice the area of today's Pacific Ocean. The sheer scale of this body of water might evoke fear, as deep waters and boundless horizons often do. But in reality, the marine life within was not nearly as fearsome as one might expect. The oceans were in a period of recovery, following the devastation caused by the Capetanian mass extinction. This event, which had taken place about 10 million years prior, had wiped out a significant portion of marine life, especially the top predators that once ruled the seas. As a result, by the time the late Permian arrived, the oceans were far less dangerous than they had been in earlier periods. The absence of large, dominant marine predators was one of the most notable aspects of this time. Before the extinction, the seas had been home to terrifying creatures like Helicoprion, a prehistoric shark with a bizarre spiral-shaped jaw filled with razor-sharp teeth. But by the Lopingian epoch, Helicoprion and other similarly fearsome creatures had long disappeared. The oceans, which might have once been the stage for epic battles between massive predators, were now quieter, with much smaller and less intimidating creatures filling the ecological niches. In contrast to later periods in Earth's history, such as the Jurassic or Cretaceous, when the oceans teemed with massive marine reptiles like Plesiosaurus and Mosasaurus, the Permian seas were relatively tame. Many of the marine animals were smaller and less aggressive, making the oceans far less dangerous for those who lived within them. The once terrifying sea scorpions, which had terrorized earlier marine ecosystems, were largely extinct, and sharks were much smaller and less threatening than their monstrous ancestors. This lack of dominant predators meant that, for a time, marine life had a chance to thrive in relative peace, free from the looming threat of being devoured by gigantic carnivores. The creatures that did inhabit the oceans during the Lopingian were primarily invertebrates and smaller fish. Brachiopods, mollusks, and ammonoids were common, as were smaller species of sharks and ray-finned fish. These animals had survived the Capetanian extinction and had begun to repopulate the seas, but they were nowhere near as fearsome as the predators that would later emerge in Earth's history. The marine ecosystems of the time were also largely composed of reef-building organisms, such as sponges and bryozoans, which contributed to the formation of large, stable reef structures in shallow waters. These reefs provided shelter for various species, offering a relatively safe haven in the otherwise vast and open ocean. While the oceans were a relatively safe place to be, the land was becoming increasingly dangerous. On the supercontinent Pangaea, the land masses were undergoing significant ecological shifts. The extinction events that had devastated marine life had also impacted terrestrial ecosystems. But instead of calming things down, these extinctions had paved the way for new and terrifying predators to rise. On land, a new era of dominance had begun, and it was the age of the Gorgonopsids. Creatures that would make the Permian landscape one of the most dangerous environments in Earth's history. Gorgonopsids were among the most fearsome predators to ever walk the Earth. These ancient beasts were part of a group of animals known as therapsids, which were mammal-like reptiles that would eventually give rise to mammals. But millions of years before the first true mammals appeared, Gorgonopsids were the apex predators of their time. Evolving after the extinction of the Dinocephalians, which had been the dominant land animals during the earlier stages of the Permian, the Gorgonopsids quickly rose to the top of the food chain, becoming some of the most formidable carnivores the world had ever seen. Among the most infamous of the Gorgonopsids was Inostrancevia, a massive predator that reached over 11 feet in length and sported deadly 6-inch canines. These saber-tooth-like fangs were perfect for delivering swift, lethal strikes to their prey, allowing them to tear through the thick hides of the large herbivores that roamed the Permian landscape. Inostrancevia was not only large and powerful, but also incredibly fast for its size, giving it a distinct advantage over its prey. Its body was built for pursuit, with long limbs that allowed it to chase down herbivores with surprising speed. Once it caught its prey, there was little hope for escape, as its strong jaws and massive teeth could deliver a fatal bite in a matter of seconds. The dominance of Inostrancevia and other Gorgonopsids extended across the vast stretches of Pangaea. Fossil evidence suggests that these predators were widespread, with species found in regions that are now modern-day Africa, Russia, and parts of Asia. This widespread distribution indicates that Gorgonopsids were highly adaptable, thriving in a variety of environments from arid deserts to more temperate regions. Their ability to dominate such a diverse range of ecosystems is a testament to their evolutionary success and their status as the top predators of the late Permian. But Inostrancevia was not the only Gorgonopsid terrorizing the land. Other species, such as Rubigea and Cyclops, also played significant roles in shaping the dangerous landscapes of the Permian. Rubigea, which was slightly smaller than Inostrancevia, was another formidable predator, known for its powerful build and lethal hunting strategies. Like its larger relative, Rubigea was equipped with sharp canines and a strong, muscular body that allowed it to take down even the largest herbivores. Its thick skull and strong jaw muscles suggest that it was capable of delivering devastating bites, breaking through bone and armor to reach the soft tissues beneath. The presence of these massive predators meant that life on land was a constant battle for survival. Herbivores had to evolve new strategies to avoid becoming prey, and many species developed armor-like defenses to protect themselves from the Gorgonopsids' lethal bites. However, even these adaptations were often not enough to prevent Gorgonopsids from reigning supreme. Their dominance was so complete that they shaped the very ecosystems they inhabited, influencing the behavior and evolution of the species around them. This period, often referred to as the planet of the Gorgonopsids, was one of the most dangerous times to be a land-dwelling creature. While the oceans might have been recovering from extinction and offering a reprieve from massive predators, the land was a much deadlier place. Gorgonopsids ruled the landscape, and their dominance would not be challenged until the catastrophic events of the Great Dying, which would bring an end to the Permian period and wipe out most of the life on Earth. The Gorgonopsids' reign on land wasn't just a product of their physical prowess. These creatures were also incredibly adaptable, evolving to thrive in a wide variety of environments. Some species, like Inostrancevia, were thought to have developed fur as an adaptation to the cooler climates of certain regions. This trait would have given them an advantage in colder environments, allowing them to expand their range and survive in places where other predators might have struggled. This kind of adaptability made gorgonopsids one of the most successful predator groups of the late Permian, capable of thriving in conditions that would have been harsh for other species. In many ways, the rise of the gorgonopsids on land marked a turning point in the evolution of life on Earth. These creatures were among the first of their kind to exhibit traits that we now associate with mammals, such as a higher metabolic rate and more complex jaw structures. While they were still reptilian in many ways, their mammalian features hinted at the evolutionary path that would eventually lead to the dominance of mammals millions of years later. But for now, during the late Permian, gorgonopsids were the undisputed rulers of the land, and they made sure that any creature daring to venture out onto the ground did so at its own peril. In summary, while the oceans were a safer place to be during the Lapingian epoch, the land was ruled by some of the most fearsome predators in Earth's history. The gorgonopsids, with their massive size, deadly canines and unparalleled adaptability, turned the terrestrial landscape into a dangerous arena of survival. They were the kings of the late Permian, and their reign would leave a lasting mark on the history of life on Earth. As the Permian period continued, gorgonopsids solidified their place as the top predators of the land. This era became a true planet of the gorgonopsids, a time when these fearsome creatures dominated ecosystems from Africa to Russia and across much of what is now Asia. Their sheer size, speed, and adaptability made them unrivaled hunters, shaping the land-based food chains and striking fear into the herbivores that shared their world. For tens of millions of years, these apex predators ruled over vast landscapes, and any creature unfortunate enough to cross paths with a gorgonopsid was likely to meet a swift and brutal end. To truly appreciate their dominance, it's important to understand just how well adapted gorgonopsids were to their environment. These creatures weren't merely large and powerful, they were also highly efficient hunters, built for speed, strength, and endurance. Their skeletal structure suggests they had long, muscular legs capable of running down prey over short distances, a vital advantage in a world where survival depended on the ability to catch or evade your next meal quickly. Their elongated, dog-like bodies allowed for flexibility and agility, making them adept at navigating the rugged and varied terrain of the Permian landscape. This agility, combined with their muscular frames, meant they could deliver devastating attacks, using their saber-like canines to pierce even the toughest hides of their prey. The ecosystems of the late Permian period were teeming with herbivores, many of which were massive, slow-moving creatures covered in thick armor or scales to protect themselves from predators. Yet, despite these defenses, gorgonopsids remained lethal hunters. Their massive jaws, combined with their sharp, dagger-like teeth, allowed them to bite down with incredible force, often crushing bones or slicing through thick layers of flesh with ease. In some cases, they may have even been able to puncture the heavy armor of large herbivores like Scutosaurus, a lumbering, heavily armored creature that roamed the dry, harsh environments of the supercontinent Pangaea. It wasn't just brute strength that made gorgonopsids so dangerous. They were also highly intelligent predators. Fossil evidence suggests that they may have hunted in coordinated groups, similar to how modern-day wolves or lions operate. This pack-hunting behaviour would have allowed them to take down prey much larger than themselves, as they could work together to isolate a weaker individual from the herd before launching a coordinated attack. Even large herbivores that had evolved heavy defences would have struggled against a coordinated pack of gorgonopsids, as multiple predators could attack from different angles, overwhelming their prey. But while Inostrancevia was the largest and most famous of the gorgonopsids, it was not the only species to make its mark on the Permian world. Other species like Rubigia and Cylocops were equally fearsome in their own right. Rubigia, for instance, was slightly smaller than Inostrancevia, but it was no less dangerous. This predator, with its thick muscular body and powerful jaws, was built for brute force. Its smaller size relative to Inostrancevia likely made it more agile and able to pursue prey in areas where larger predators could not. This adaptability ensured that Rubigea could thrive in different environments, spreading across various regions of Pangaea. Meanwhile, Cyclops represented yet another variation within the Gorgonopsid family. Though smaller than some of its relatives, Cyclops had a more slender, streamlined build, which may have made it one of the fastest predators of its time. Speed, after all, was an important factor in hunting during the Permian. While brute force could bring down large herbivores, being able to chase down swift, smaller prey was also essential for survival. Cyclops might have excelled in this regard, using its speed to chase down quicker prey that larger Gorgonopsids like Inostrancevia and Rubigea might have struggled to catch. In addition to their physical prowess, Gorgonopsids were also highly adaptable in terms of climate and habitat. The late Permian period was characterized by extreme environmental conditions, with vast deserts, arid plains, and cold regions stretching across the supercontinent. The ability to thrive in such diverse and often harsh environments speaks to the resilience and adaptability of these predators. Some Gorgonopsids may have even evolved fur or other insulating adaptations to cope with colder climates, a feature that would later become more common in mammals. This adaptability would have given them a significant edge over other predators and allowed them to expand their range into areas where resources might have been scarce or where other species struggled to survive. While the Gorgonopsids were undoubtedly the dominant predators of the late Permian, they were not alone in their reign of terror. Around the same time, another group of formidable predators emerged to rival them, the Therocephalians. These creatures were part of the Therapsid family, just like the Gorgonopsids, but they represented a different evolutionary path. Therocephalians, which translates to beast heads, were named for their large, oversized skulls relative to their bodies. These predators, though not as well known as the Gorgonopsids, were just as deadly, and in some ways even more adaptable. One of the most dangerous Therocephalians was Moschahinus, a jaguar-sized predator with a disproportionately large head and a powerful set of jaws. This creature was built to kill, with sharp, carnivorous teeth and strong forelimbs that could pin down prey during an attack. Unlike Gorgonopsids, which often relied on their speed and size, Moschahinus was more compact and muscular, using its strength to overpower its prey in close quarters. Its large head allowed for a particularly forceful bite, and it likely used its strong forelimbs to grip onto struggling prey, making escape nearly impossible. Though Moschahinus was smaller than the massive Inostrancevia, it was no less fearsome. Its size was an advantage in some ways, as it allowed it to be more versatile in its hunting strategies. Moschahinus could ambush prey in a variety of settings, from dense forests to more open plains. Its large head, combined with its relatively stocky body, suggests that it was a powerful predator that specialized in short, explosive bursts of energy, similar to how a jaguar might stalk and pounce on its prey in modern ecosystems. One particularly interesting aspect of Therocephalians like Moschahinus was their potential for even greater adaptability than the Gorgonopsids. Some scientists speculate that certain species of Therocephalians may have been venomous, making them some of the earliest land animals to use venom as a hunting tool. Though evidence of venom in prehistoric creatures is rare and difficult to confirm, the idea that some Therocephalians could have delivered toxic bites adds another layer of danger to these already formidable predators. If true, venomous Therocephalians would have been able to take down prey more efficiently, using their venom to immobilize their victims before finishing them off with a bite. Therocephalians, like Gorgonopsids, were also highly adaptable. They could thrive in a variety of environments, from the arid deserts of Pangaea to the more temperate regions of the supercontinent. Their adaptability, combined with their deadly hunting strategies, allowed them to carve out a niche for themselves alongside the Gorgonopsids, ensuring that the late Permian was filled with terrifying predators at every turn. The coexistence of gorgonopsids and therocephalians created a dynamic and competitive ecosystem. Though gorgonopsids were larger and more dominant in many regions, therocephalians offered fierce competition, especially in areas where food resources were scarce. The two groups likely occupied slightly different ecological niches, with gorgonopsids favouring larger prey and therocephalians targeting smaller or more elusive animals. But no matter where one looked on land during the late Permian, danger was ever present. Between the massive saber-toothed gorgonopsids and the stocky, powerful therocephalians, herbivores had little hope of avoiding predation. This era, with its array of deadly land predators, was one of the most dangerous times to be a terrestrial creature in Earth's history. The gorgonopsids and therocephalians, with their unique evolutionary adaptations and predatory prowess, made sure that life on land was a constant struggle for survival. It was a time when the natural order seemed to favour the hunters, and herbivores had to rely on size, armour, or sheer luck to survive. As the Permian period edged toward its cataclysmic end, these predators continued to rule the land, shaping the ecosystems and leaving a lasting imprint on the history of life on Earth. Their dominance, however, would be short-lived in the grand scheme of things. The Great Dying, the worst mass extinction event in Earth's history, was on the horizon, and when it struck, it would wipe out more than 90% of species on the planet, including most of the gorgonopsids and therocephalians. But for a brief window in time, they were the undisputed rulers of the land, and their reign was as fierce as it was unforgettable. While the late Permian period is often remembered for its terrifying predators, the landscape wasn't solely dominated by carnivores. Herbivores, although faced with constant threats from creatures like gorgonopsids and therocephalians, still managed to carve out their own niches in the ecosystems of the time. In fact, the survival and adaptation of herbivores were crucial to the balance of the Permian world, as they formed the base of the food chain that supported the predators. To live in a world where they were hunted by such formidable creatures, herbivores had to develop a variety of strategies for protection, some relying on size, others on armour, and still others on behaviour and burrowing tactics. Among these herbivores, two stand out as particularly notable: Scutosaurus and Lystrosaurus. Scutosaurus was one of the largest herbivores of its time. This heavily armoured reptile weighed over a ton and had a body covered in thick, bony plates, providing it with a formidable defence against predators. Its name, which means shield lizard, is a testament to its impressive protective adaptations. Unlike the fast and agile predators that roamed the Permian landscape, Scutosaurus was slow-moving, relying on its armoured body to deter attacks rather than outrunning them. The thick plates that covered its back and sides acted as a natural shield, making it difficult for predators to penetrate its defences. Despite its slow pace, Scutosaurus was not an easy target. Its sheer size alone made it a challenge for even the most skilled predators. A gorgonopsid like Inostrancevia might have had the strength to bring down a Scutosaurus, but it would have been no easy task. The predator would have had to work around the armoured plates, targeting more vulnerable areas like the underbelly or the legs, which would require both patience and strategy. In this way, Scutosaurus acted as a kind of living tank, plodding through the late Permian landscape with its defences always on display, a clear signal to any would-be predator that it was not an easy meal. But armour alone wasn't enough to guarantee survival in the harsh conditions of the late Permian, and while Scutosaurus relied on physical protection, other herbivores adopted different strategies. One such creature was Lystrosaurus, a smaller but highly successful herbivore that would go on to survive even the mass extinction at the end of the Permian. Lystrosaurus was a burrower, a trait that proved to be a major survival advantage in the hostile world of the late Permian. Unlike the heavily armoured Scutosaurus, Lystrosaurus relied on its ability to hide and dig for safety when danger was near. Lystrosaurus was a strange-looking creature with a stocky body, short limbs and a beak-like snout that it used to root through the ground for plants and roots. Though it wasn't particularly large or fast, its ability to dig burrows allowed it to escape from predators and find shelter in the harsh Permian environment. Burrowing also provided Lystrosaurus with protection from the extreme weather conditions that were becoming more common during this time. As the climate grew hotter and more arid, with vast deserts forming across Pangaea, the ability to escape underground where temperatures were cooler and more stable became a crucial survival tactic. Despite their differences, both Scutosaurus and Lystrosaurus shared a common trait: resilience. Each in their own way, they adapted to the dangers of their environment, finding ways to coexist with the deadly predators that roamed the land. The heavy armor of Scutosaurus and the burrowing behavior of Lystrosaurus were just two examples of the ways herbivores adapted to the dangerous world of the late Permian. Their survival depended on these adaptations, as well as their ability to find food in an increasingly harsh and competitive environment. In addition to these more prominent herbivores, a variety of other plant-eating creatures thrived in the late Permian. Some were small, fast-moving animals that relied on speed and agility to avoid predators, darting in and out of dense vegetation or rocky crevices. Others were more specialized in their diets, focusing on specific types of plants that grew in the various ecosystems scattered across Pangaea. The diversity of herbivores was crucial to maintaining the balance of life during this time, as their presence provided a steady food source for the predators that dominated the top of the food chain. While the skies during the late Permian weren't filled with giant, menacing flying reptiles as they would be in the later Mesozoic era, there were still smaller flying creatures that contributed to the diversity of life. Among these were the Weigeltissauridae, a family of small, gliding reptiles. These creatures, though not true flyers like birds or pterosaurs, were capable of gliding short distances using membranous skin stretched between elongated ribs, similar to how modern flying squirrels glide today. Weigeltissaurids were relatively small, and their gliding abilities likely allowed them to move quickly between trees or other elevated surfaces, helping them escape ground-dwelling predators, or perhaps find food sources that were otherwise out of reach. Though they weren't a direct threat to large animals, these small gliders played an important role in the ecosystems of the late Permian. Their ability to glide from tree to tree or from rock ledge to rock ledge allowed them to exploit resources that other creatures could not access. They likely fed on insects or small plants, filling a niche in the food web that would have been largely untouched by the larger herbivores and predators on the ground. Additionally, the presence of these gliding reptiles added to the overall complexity of the Permian ecosystems, contributing to the variety of life that existed during this period. The ability of creatures like the Weigeltissauridae to adapt to their environments through flight or gliding was just one example of the many innovative strategies that life developed during the late Permian. While the period is often remembered for its towering predators, the smaller creatures, from herbivores to gliders, were just as integral to the story of life at the time. They filled the gaps in the ecosystem, ensuring that even in a world dominated by carnivores, there was still room for a wide range of life forms to thrive. These smaller flying creatures may not have been the fierce aerial predators that would dominate later eras, but their ability to survive in the face of so many other threats speaks to the ingenuity of life in the Permian. They were a small but essential part of a much larger, more complex ecosystem, one that was constantly evolving and adapting to the harsh realities of life on Earth during this tumultuous time. Their presence in the skies, however limited in scope, was a reminder that not all life was engaged in the brutal struggle for dominance that played out on the ground below. Ultimately, the herbivores and smaller creatures of the late Permian played a critical role in sustaining the food chains that supported the larger, more dominant predators. Their adaptations, whether in the form of heavy armor, burrowing, or gliding, allowed them to survive in a world where danger was ever present. Even as the Permian period hurtled toward its catastrophic end, these creatures continued to thrive, finding ways to coexist with the relentless pressures of predation, competition, and environmental change. Their resilience in the face of such challenges was a testament to the power of adaptation and the persistence of life, even in the most dangerous and unpredictable of times. As formidable as the predators and resilient as the herbivores were during the late Permian period, the most unrelenting and dangerous force of all was not the gorgonopsids, the therocephalians, or any other predator. It was the environment itself. Mother Nature, during this time, was perhaps the most merciless adversary that any species faced. The climate of the late Permian was harsh, unpredictable, and unforgiving, creating extreme challenges for all forms of life. The land, in particular, was a place of severe hardship, with widespread deserts, scorching temperatures, and increasingly volatile weather patterns. At the heart of these environmental challenges was the supercontinent Pangaea, which stretched across the planet, merging most of Earth's land masses into one gigantic block of connected terrain. Pangaea's sheer size created its own unique set of climate conditions, many of which were detrimental to life. Because of the vast distance between the center of the continent and the surrounding oceans, much of Pangaea's interior was far from any source of moisture. This led to the formation of immense desert regions that covered a significant portion of the supercontinent, turning large areas into barren, arid wastelands. The deserts of the late Permian were unlike anything we see on Earth today. While modern deserts like the Sahara or the Gobi are certainly inhospitable, the deserts of Pangaea were even more extreme. The combination of scorching temperatures, little to no rainfall, and the lack of vegetation made survival in these regions nearly impossible. Average temperatures in these deserts could reach as high as 35 degrees Celsius, 95 degrees Fahrenheit, with some areas likely exceeding even these harsh conditions. The heat was relentless, and the lack of water meant that few species could survive for long in these environments. Any animals that did venture into these arid regions had to be incredibly well adapted to the dry conditions, often developing unique strategies to conserve water and withstand the heat. But even beyond the deserts, the climate of the late Permian was becoming increasingly hostile. The planet was in the grip of a gradual but significant warming trend, a result of natural processes that were altering Earth's atmosphere and surface conditions. Volcanic activity played a major role in this climate shift, with vast eruptions releasing large quantities of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. These eruptions not only contributed to the warming of the planet, but also caused widespread environmental disruption as volcanic ash and gases polluted the air, blocking out sunlight in some areas and leading to unpredictable weather patterns. The combination of warming temperatures and shifting weather patterns meant that even regions outside of the deserts faced severe environmental challenges. Forests, which had once been home to diverse ecosystems, began to dry out, turning into semi-arid regions where life struggled to survive. Water sources became scarcer, and the food chains that depended on them grew more fragile. Rivers and lakes that had once provided sustenance to both herbivores and predators began to shrink or disappear altogether, forcing animals to travel farther and farther in search of water and food. For the animals of the late Permian, especially those living on land, these environmental changes were as dangerous as any predator. In fact, the combination of extreme heat, drought, and changing ecosystems likely killed off more species than even the most fearsome gorgonopsids or therocephalians. Herbivores, in particular, suffered as their food sources, plants, became less abundant in the increasingly dry climate. As the plant life dwindled, herbivores either had to adapt quickly or perish. This, in turn, had a cascading effect on the predators that relied on these herbivores for food. As the herbivore populations shrank, so too did the food available to carnivores, leading to increased competition among predators for what little prey remained. The situation was further compounded by the unpredictable nature of the weather. In some regions, flash floods would occur after long periods of drought, washing away vegetation and animal life in a sudden deluge. In other areas, Windstorms would whip across the arid plains, scouring the land and eroding the already fragile soil, making it even more difficult for plant life to take root. These volatile and sometimes violent shifts in the environment created an atmosphere of uncertainty, where survival became a daily struggle, not just against other animals, but against the very forces of nature. The late Permian world was, in many ways, on the brink of collapse. Ecosystems were becoming more fragile, and the delicate balance between predators and prey was beginning to break down. The extreme climate, combined with the relentless pressure from natural disasters and volcanic activity, pushed many species to the edge of extinction. For some, the adaptations that had allowed them to survive for millions of years were no longer enough to cope with the rapidly changing environment. Entire species disappeared, unable to adapt quickly enough to the new, harsher conditions. But perhaps the most telling sign of how dangerous the late Permian climate had become was the increased frequency of mass die-offs, where large numbers of animals perished in relatively short periods. These die-offs were often triggered by sudden environmental changes, an unexpected drought, a volcanic eruption, or a particularly severe heat wave. When these events occurred, entire populations could be wiped out, leaving only the hardiest and most adaptable species to continue the struggle for survival. For the creatures that did survive, life in the late Permian was marked by a constant need to adapt to the worsening conditions. Herbivores had to develop new ways of finding food and conserving water, while predators had to become more efficient hunters to make the most of the shrinking prey populations. In some cases, animals developed physical adaptations to cope with the heat, such as increased body surface area to dissipate heat more effectively, or behavioral changes, like becoming more nocturnal to avoid the scorching daytime temperatures. But even these adaptations could only go so far in the face of the relentless environmental pressures. As the Permian period drew to a close, the world was becoming an increasingly inhospitable place for life. The combination of extreme heat, drought, volcanic activity, and shifting ecosystems had created a planet on the verge of a massive environmental collapse. This collapse would come to a head in what is now known as the Great Dying, the worst mass extinction event in Earth's history. But before that final cataclysm, the late Permian was already a world of hardship, where survival meant not only outsmarting predators, but also enduring the ever-worsening wrath of Mother Nature herself. Even the most resilient creatures of the late Permian could not have anticipated the scale of the disaster that was about to unfold. The increasingly hostile climate was setting the stage for a global catastrophe unlike anything the planet had ever seen. Yet, for millions of years leading up to this extinction, the relentless environmental challenges of the late Permian period served as a grim prelude to the extinction event that would wipe out more than 90% of all species on Earth. This era, defined by its extreme conditions, forced the creatures of the Permian to adapt in ways that few other periods in Earth's history demanded. Those that survived did so by developing unique and often remarkable strategies for coping with the heat, the drought, and the constant threat of environmental disaster. But as adaptable as life was, the late Permian world was rapidly becoming a place where even the most hardened creatures struggled to survive. The planet was changing, and not even the most fearsome predators or the most resilient herbivores could escape the consequences of the harsh climate that had taken hold.